My name is Claire Weston. I am 34 years old. The day I found out my sister had changed the locks on my house, I was sitting in a hotel room in Denver with a cup of coffee and a signed demolition contract in my email inbox. She called me at 9:47 in the morning, and her voice was bright and proud, the way it always was when she thought she had finally gotten one step ahead of me. "I had the locks changed," she said. "I think it's time we sorted out this living situation properly. Don't rush home on my account." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the contract on my screen one more time. The deposit had cleared 4 days earlier. $300,000. 17% of the full agreed sale price of $1.8 million to Hartwell Demolition and Land Development. What Natalie didn't know was that she had just locked herself inside a building I had already sold to a company whose entire business model was tearing things down. This is that story. Let me take you back to the beginning, because nothing that happened at the end makes sense without it. I grew up in Carterville, Ohio, the older of 2 daughters in a family that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. My father, Dennis Weston, worked as a civil engineer for the county. My mother, Patricia Weston, taught 2nd grade at Elmwood Elementary for over 20 years. We lived in a 3-bedroom colonial on Birch Hollow Drive, and every neighbor knew our names, and every Christmas the porch had lights on it, and everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Natalie was born 3 years after me, and from the very first week she was home. She was the sun that the rest of us orbited. Not because she was cruel, not then, but because she was brilliant at performing sweetness. She knew how to cry at exactly the right moment. She knew how to walk into a room and make every adult in it feel like the most important person she had ever met. She had a gift for it, and my parents didn't see it as a performance. They saw it as character. I was the quiet one. Steady, self-sufficient, the one who figured things out on her own without asking for help. My father used to say, "Claire doesn't need much. The way you might say a piece of furniture doesn't take up much space." I took it as a compliment for years. I was 18 before I understood that it was his way of justifying a very specific kind of neglect. The examples are almost too many to list, but let me give you 3 that tell you everything you need to know about how this family was arranged. When I was 16 and Natalie was 13, our parents agreed to send one of us to a summer architecture program at Ohio State. It was 3 weeks, fully residential, and it cost $1,200. I had already applied. I had already been accepted. I had spent 2 months building a portfolio of hand-drawn designs because I had wanted to be an architect since I was 9 years old. My father sat me down at the kitchen table 8 days before the program started and explained that Natalie had expressed an interest in interior design. "She needs this more than you do," he said. "You're the strong one. You'll find another way." He sent Natalie. She lasted 11 days and came home early because she missed her friends. She never pursued interior design again. I never went to that program. When I was 22 and just finishing my undergraduate degree in urban planning, our grandmother Helen died and left her estate to be divided equally between my mother and her sister. My mother's share was enough to pay off the remainder of a home equity loan my parents had taken out when Natalie was in high school. That loan had been used to fund Natalie's private tutoring, her travel volleyball league, and eventually the first semester of her cosmetology school tuition before she dropped out. I found this out not when it happened, but 4 years later, when my mother mentioned it casually at dinner the way you mention the weather. I had paid my own college loans without a single dollar of help. This was not an accident. It was a pattern. The 3rd example is the house itself. Grandma Helen owned a property on Sycamore Lane in Millfield, Ohio. Not a mansion, but a solid paid-off craftsman with a 1/4-acre lot, 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, and a wraparound porch that had been in the family since 1951. When Helen died, that property was listed as a specific bequest in her will. She left it to me. Not my mother, not Natalie. Me. She had told me this directly when I was 25, sitting in her living room during one of my regular Sunday visits. "You're the only one who ever came," she said. "You're the only one who listened. That house should belong to someone who will love it the way I did." When the will was read, Natalie was furious. My mother was quiet and tight-lipped. My father said, "Well, I suppose Helen always had her favorites," as if the inheritance of a house I had earned through years of consistent presence was somehow equivalent to the favoritism that had defined my entire childhood. I moved into the Sycamore Lane house when I was 26. I repaired the porch, refinished the floors, had the electrical updated, installed new windows. I did most of the cosmetic work myself on weekends. By the time I was 30, the house had been appraised at $800,000, which tells you what the Millfield real estate market did in 4 years and what careful maintenance and attention can do to a property. By the time I was 33, 1 year before this story takes place, a land developer had approached me. His name was Richard Hartwell. His company, Hartwell Demolition and Land Development, was quietly acquiring a 3-block radius on and around Sycamore Lane to build a mixed-use residential complex. Every property on the block was being bought and demolished. He offered me $1.8 million for the house and the land. I did not tell my family. I spent 4 months in conversation with Hartwell's legal team. I had my own attorney, a woman named Sandra Kessler, who reviewed every page of the contract. The deal was structured with an initial deposit of $300,000 and the balance to be paid at closing, which was scheduled for 60 days after the contract signing. I signed the contract on a Tuesday morning in October. The deposit cleared that Friday. 60 days until closing. 60 days until Hartwell's crews would move in with their equipment. 60 days during which I needed to vacate the property and remove my belongings, which I had already arranged to do, quietly, systematically, over the preceding 3 weeks. By the time I flew to Denver for a work conference, most of my meaningful possessions were already in a storage unit 12 miles away. What I had not counted on was Natalie. Here is what had been happening in the background of my orderly exit. For approximately 14 months before any of this, Natalie had been living with me. She had arrived on a Thursday night in August the previous year, 1 large rolling suitcase and a garbage bag of shoes, tearful and fragile, and explaining that her boyfriend Marcus had asked her to leave the apartment they shared in Columbus. She needed somewhere to stay just for a little while. She said 3 weeks. She stayed 14 months. In those 14 months, she paid rent exactly twice, both times after I asked directly, and waited a week for a response. She borrowed my car without asking on 6 occasions. She had 2 of her friends over for what was supposed to be a one-night birthday gathering that lasted until 4:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. She rearranged my kitchen, explained to me that my furniture had no energy, and at one point told a neighbor that she and I owned the house together and had inherited it jointly. I corrected the neighbor directly. Natalie told me later that I had embarrassed her. I had been planning to ask Natalie to leave before the Denver trip. Sandra had advised me that the cleanest path was to give written notice, 30 days before I told anyone in the family about the sale. I had drafted the letter twice. Both times I had set it aside, not out of reluctance but out of timing. I wanted to be precise about the sequence. What happened instead was that I came home from a site visit one evening to find Natalie seated at my kitchen table with a legal pad covered in her handwriting. She had written out what appeared to be a list of rooms and what might go in each of them. When I asked what she was doing, she looked up without any embarrassment at all and said, "I've been thinking about how we could divide this space more sensibly. I think if we converted the 3rd bedroom into a proper studio, I could start my candle business from here. I could pay a share of the utilities." I asked her, very carefully, whose house she thought this was. She tilted her head and said, "Claire, you've been so generous letting me stay here. I just think if we formalized things a little, it would be better for both of us." I told her the house was mine. She told me I was being territorial. That was a Thursday in September. I flew to Denver the following Tuesday. I had not given her the letter yet. She called me at 9:47 on Wednesday morning. And you already know what she said. What you don't know yet is what she did between the moment I left and the moment she made that call. According to the neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Evelyn Marsh, who had known Grandma Helen for 30 years and who watched that house the way a guardian watches a ward, Natalie had called a locksmith that same Tuesday evening. She had stood in my doorway and told the locksmith that she was the co-owner of the property and that she had locked herself out. She paid him $80 in cash. She had the original locks on the front door, the back door, and the side garage entrance all replaced. Then, according to Evelyn, she brought in 2 large plastic bins from her car, unpacked what appeared to be a set of curtains, and hung them in the front window. She was decorating. I stayed on the phone with Natalie for exactly 4 minutes after her announcement. I did not argue. I did not tell her about the sale. I said very calmly, "I'm going to need to get some things from the house when I'm back on Friday." She said, "Of course. Just let me know when you're coming." Then she added, "You know, I really think this could work out for everyone. We could make this a real home." I said, "I think you're right." I hung up. Then I called Sandra Kessler. If you've ever been in a situation where the person who was supposed to love you turned around and reached for what was yours the moment your back was turned, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me what you did. Did you walk away quietly, or did you let them see the full picture? I want to hear from you. And if this story is making you feel something, please subscribe to Revenge Diary. This is exactly the kind of story we tell every single day. Sandra's first question was practical. Has she signed anything? Has she made any written claim to the property? I told her no. Sandra's second question was whether Natalie had been paying rent in a way that could constitute a tenancy. I told her about the 2 partial payments. Sandra was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to send you a formal notice of trespass letter this afternoon. I'm also going to prepare a 30-day notice to vacate, backdated to last week, to account for the conversation you had on Thursday. You're going to need to serve it." I asked her about the sale. "The sale is unaffected," she said. "Her presence on the property does not change your ownership, and it does not change the contract. What it does change is the timeline for getting her out cleanly. If she refuses to leave before closing, Hartwell's team will arrive to a property with an unauthorized occupant, and that creates a complication." I told Sandra I understood. I told her I would handle it. I want to tell you about the next 48 hours, because this is where the story stops being about a house and starts being about something much older than a house. I sat in that Denver hotel room for a long time after I got off the phone with Sandra. I didn't order room service. I didn't turn on the television. I thought about every moment I had stored away in the quiet part of my memory. The architecture program I never attended. The college loans I paid alone. The Sunday afternoons I spent driving to Millfield to visit Grandma Helen, while the rest of my family sent occasional texts that went unanswered for days. I thought about Natalie rearranging my kitchen and telling me I was being territorial in a house she had moved into with 1 suitcase and a garbage bag of shoes. I thought about the locksmith she had paid $80 to make herself the gatekeeper of something she had never built and never earned. I did not feel angry. I felt something colder and more useful than anger. I felt completely clear. I spent Thursday morning on calls. My first call was to Richard Hartwell directly, not his legal team. Hartwell himself. I explained that I had a family member who had become an unauthorized occupant of the property. I told him that I had already retained counsel and that the situation would be resolved before closing. Hartwell was a blunt man who had built his company by solving problems efficiently. He said, "I've dealt with this before. If she's not out by closing, my legal team will file for an emergency vacate order. It's not your problem anymore the moment we close." Then he said something that I have thought about many times since. "Miss Weston, in my experience, people who try to claim things they don't own always know, somewhere underneath it, that they don't own them. She knows." I thanked him and ended the call. My second call was to Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn was 71 years old and had the kind of memory that functions as a video recorder. She told me she had watched Natalie carry 3 additional boxes into the house that morning. She told me the living room curtains had been changed. She told me that Natalie had introduced herself to the mail carrier as the new resident. I asked Evelyn if she would be willing to provide a written statement about what she had observed. She said, "I'll have it ready this afternoon and I'll use my good stationery." I have always loved Evelyn Marsh. My third call was to my mother. I made this call not because I expected support, but because the sequence of events required it. Patricia Weston answered on the second ring. I told her what Natalie had done. I told her calmly and in detail. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Claire, you know how Natalie is. She probably thought she was helping. She's been through so much this year." I asked my mother what exactly Natalie had been through. My mother said, "Marcus, the breakup. She's been struggling." I told my mother that Natalie had changed the locks on my house while I was traveling for work and announced that she was formalizing her occupancy. My mother said, "You have to admit you did let her stay there for over a year." I did not argue. I simply said, "I wanted to make sure you knew what happened." Then I ended the call. My father called me back 40 minutes later. He did not apologize. He said, "Your sister needs stability right now. I think the two of you need to have a real conversation about the property." I told my father I had already retained legal counsel. He was quiet. Then he said, "That feels extreme." I said, "It's appropriate," and I ended the call. On Friday morning, I flew home. Sandra had sent the trespass letter and the notice to vacate by certified mail, and a process server had attempted delivery Thursday afternoon. Natalie had not answered the door. The server noted that she was present, as the interior lights were on and music was audible from inside. The envelope was left in the mailbox per legal procedure. I drove from the airport directly to Evelyn Marsh's house. Evelyn gave me tea and her written statement, neatly typed on ivory paper and signed and dated at the bottom. She also showed me photographs she had taken to her front window of Natalie on my porch, accepting a delivery of what appeared to be flat-pack furniture from a van. Natalie had ordered furniture. I knocked on my own front door at 2:17 in the afternoon. Natalie answered in what appeared to be my bathrobe. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. "You're home early," she said. "I thought you were coming tonight. I changed my flight." She stepped back and opened the door. I walked into my own house and looked around. She had hung the new curtains. She had pushed the couch to a different wall. There was a flat-pack shelf unit in a half-assembled state propped against the hallway. On the kitchen counter was a diffuser that I did not own, pumping something floral into the air. She had rearranged the kitchen again. I stood in the center of the living room. Natalie stood in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms crossed, and she had arranged her face into something that was half nervous and half defiant, the expression of a person who has done something and is deciding in real time whether to defend it or apologize for it. "I know this was a big step," she started, "but I really think that if we approach this as partners, Natalie," I said. She stopped. "You have received a formal notice to vacate this property. You have 30 days, which began last Thursday. If you are not out by that date, the matter will be handled legally. I would encourage you to arrange alternative accommodation." She stared at me. "You're being serious." "Completely." "Claire, I changed the locks because I thought, I know what you thought." I looked at the assembled shelf unit against the wall. "You need to stop adding personal property to this house. It will complicate your exit." She sat down on the couch she had moved. Her face was doing several things at once. "Mom said you called her." "I did." "She said you're making this into something it doesn't need to be." "Natalie." I said her name the way you close a door. "You have 30 days." I left. I drove to my storage unit and added 3 more boxes of things I had quietly removed from the house over the preceding weeks. Then I drove to Sandra's office and signed the final documents required before closing. The closing date was confirmed, November 14th, 29 days away. The next 2 weeks moved according to a precise schedule. Sandra's office coordinated with Hartwell's legal team. The county was notified. The utilities transfer schedule was set. Every piece of paperwork that needed to be in order was in order. I was methodical. I was quiet. I did not tell my family about the sale. Natalie, meanwhile, was doing what Natalie always did when she sensed that control was slipping away from her. She performed. She called my mother every day with updates on her emotional state. She told a version of events to every relative who would listen, in which she was a woman who had poured herself into creating a home and was now being evicted by a sister who had always been cold. My cousin Darla called me on a Saturday morning to say that she had heard I was going through something and wanted to check in. I told Darla I was doing very well and thanked her for the call. My Aunt Barbara sent me a text that said, "Family is everything, Claire. I hope you and Natalie can work this out." I responded with a thumbs up emoji and set the phone down. My father called twice. I answered the second call. He said, "This is going to damage your relationship with your sister permanently." I told him I understood. He said, "You're going to regret this." I did not argue. On the 21st day, the notice to vacate period ended. Natalie had not moved out. She had, however, removed the flat-pack shelf unit from the hallway, which I took as evidence that she had at least read the notice carefully enough to understand that adding furniture was a legal problem. Sandra filed for an emergency occupancy removal order. The court date was scheduled for November 9th, 5 days before closing. I did not attend the hearing. Sandra attended on my behalf. Natalie attended with no attorney. The judge reviewed the chain of title, the deed, the signed sale contract, and Evelyn Marsh's written statement. The order was issued in 40 minutes. Natalie had 72 hours to remove her possessions and vacate. A deputy would conduct a welfare check at the property on November 12th to confirm compliance. Natalie called me 11 times between the moment she left the courthouse and 9 o'clock that evening. I answered the 5th call. "You sold the house," she said. It was the first time I had heard her voice sound genuinely stripped of its performance. Not angry, not tearful. Hollow. "Who did you sell it to? A demolition company." The silence that followed was long enough to count. "They're going to tear it down?" "The entire block is being redeveloped. They break ground in December." "Claire." Her voice cracked on the single syllable of my name. "That was Grandma Helen's house." "Yes," I said. "It was. You can't. You cannot sell Grandma's house to a demolition company. That house has been in our family for Natalie." I waited until I had her attention. "You changed the locks on it while I was out of town. You ordered furniture for a house you don't own. You told our neighbor you were the co-owner. You told the mail carrier you were the new resident. You had 14 months to treat that house with the reverence you're describing right now. And what you did instead was treat it as an acquisition." She didn't speak. "You have 72 hours per the court order. I would use them." I ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table, the small one I had set up in my studio apartment, the one I had rented 2 weeks before the contract signing, in quiet anticipation of all of this. I had a cup of tea. It was not dramatic. It was not triumphant. It was just quiet, the way a thing feels when all the noise that surrounded it finally stops. November 14th arrived the way closing days always do, with paperwork and wire transfers and a conference room and lawyers on both sides. The balance of $1.5 million cleared into my account at 2:11 in the afternoon. Sandra shook my hand. Richard Hartwell shook my hand. I drove to the storage unit. I looked at the boxes that contained the things I had chosen to keep. I sat in the car for a while. Then I drove to the cemetery where Grandma Helen was buried and stood at her headstone with my hands in my coat pockets. I did not bring flowers. I just stood there. "I sold the house," I told her. "I know you'd have something to say about that, but you always told me that a thing only has as much power over you as you let it. I let go of the thing so I could keep what it meant. The fallout was what you would expect, and it was also nothing like what you would expect." My mother called the day after closing. Her voice was not angry. It was bewildered, the way someone sounds when the map they have been using turns out to be wrong. "Why didn't you tell us you were selling?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because every conversation I've had with this family about that house has been a conversation about why someone else deserved it. I didn't want to have that conversation again, so I handled it. She was quiet for a long time. $1.8 million, she said finally. "You're gonna be all right." There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Not pride exactly, something more reluctant than pride. Recognition, maybe, that her quiet, self-sufficient, low-maintenance older daughter had been building something all along that no one had bothered to look at. My father did not call for 11 days. When he did, he sounded like a man who had spent those 11 days constructing something to say, and then discarding it and starting again. "I want to say that I think we could have handled some things differently," he said, "over the years." It was not an apology. It was the shape of an apology, the outline of one, but it was more than he had ever offered before, and I was honest enough with myself to recognize that. "I appreciate that," I said. "I think so too." We spoke for 12 minutes. It was the longest real conversation I had had with my father in years. Natalie did not call for 3 weeks. When she did, she had moved into a room in a shared house in Columbus and started a job at an event planning company. She told me she was seeing a therapist. She said it the way you say something that costs you something to say, with the effort visible in the sentence. "I think I've been doing a lot of things for a long time that I told myself were reasonable, and I don't know if they were." I did not respond immediately. I let the silence sit the way she needed it to sit. "I don't know if I want an apology," I said. "I want to see what happens next. That's all I can honestly tell you right now." She said she understood. She said she was sorry about the house. I told her the truth, which was that I had made peace with it before the ink was dry on the contract. The house was a place, I said. What it meant wasn't in the walls. Here is what I have learned from all of it, sitting on the other side of a decision that most people in my life thought was either cold or reckless or both. I have learned that the people who depend on you to be the strong one, the self-sufficient one, the one who doesn't need much, they are not wrong that you are strong. They are wrong about what strength is for. Strength is not a resource to be extracted. It is not permission for other people to take and take and take without looking at what they are taking from. Strength is the thing that allows you to build quietly, to document carefully, to wait for the precise right moment, and then to act without rage, without performance, without the need for anyone else to understand in real time what you are doing and why. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she left me that house. She was not just leaving me property, she was leaving me proof that she had seen me. And what Natalie tried to do, showing up with her suitcase and her garbage bag of shoes and her rearranged kitchen and her $80 locksmith, was take the one place in the world where someone had said, in legally binding terms, "You belong here." I would not let her have it, not because I needed to win, because I needed to finish what Grandma Helen started. If there is someone in your life who has been quietly collecting what you built while telling you that you're the strong one, that you don't need as much, that the other person's needs are more urgent, I want you to think about what you have that they don't know about yet. It doesn't have to be a house. It can be a plan, a skill, a relationship, a document, a piece of evidence. It can be the simple fact that you have been paying attention for a very long time and they haven't. The most powerful position you will ever be in is the one where you know the full picture and the person across from you thinks they know it and doesn't. I am 34 years old. I have $1.8 million in an investment account, a studio apartment that is entirely mine, and a storage unit full of the things that were worth keeping. I do not have a wraparound porch or original hardwood floors or the smell of cedar on a Friday evening. I have something better. I have the clear knowledge of exactly what I am worth, and I arrived at that knowledge without anyone's help, which is, in the end, the most Weston thing about me. and also the truest thing about me. If someone in your life has been trying to take the thing that belongs to you, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story felt like something you've been waiting to hear, subscribe to Revenge Diary. We are here every day, and we are not going anywhere. Thank you for spending this time with me. I know that stories like this one are not easy to sit with, even when they're not your own. There is something about watching someone quietly take back what was theirs that reaches into a place in all of us. I am grateful every single time someone watches to the end, leaves a comment, or shares this story with someone who needed to hear it. You are the reason we keep telling these stories. You are the reason we built this channel. Please subscribe if you haven't, and come back tomorrow, because we have another story waiting that I think is going to stay with you. The quietest women always have the loudest endings. We'll see you then.